Okay. Thank you all for being patient. As we've just said, there's a transportation issue. Somebody should be working on that. There was again, for those of you who may not have been here for the earlier announcements, there was an accident. I misspoke earlier. It was on the Veterans Bridge, and many of our members were caught on the bridge at the time of the accident. So I think everyone's here. Welcome to the 28th meeting of the leadership group of the Tampa Bay TMA. My name is Rafael Montalvo, for those of you who may not have been here before. I'm the facilitator for the group. I work here under the auspices of something called the Consensus Center, which is an institute set up by the state legislature to help folks have public policy decisions. I'm not with any of the MPOs or with any of the other participating organizations. I'd like to welcome Senator Darrell Roussan, who has agreed to join us for one of our discussions. We'll go around the table and introduce members, and then, I think we will still introduce, we normally introduce everyone in the audience very quickly and briefly, so we will do that. I'll start here. Okay. Oh, and I have been told it is imperative to speak into the microphones today, or your voice will not be captured for the recording. So, members would introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Brad Miller, CEO of PSTA.
David Glenn, FDOT District 7 Secretary.
Thank you.
Darrell Roussan, Senate District 19, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County.
Good morning, Darden Rice, City of St. Pete, City Council, PSTA, Forward Pinellas.
And this is your first meeting as a member of this group, correct?
Yes.
Welcome also.
Dave Eggers, Pinellas County Commissioner, PSTA, and Forward Pinellas.
Good morning, Doreen Caudell, City Clearwater Vice Mayor, Board Chair for Forward Pinellas, PSTA.
With Clanton, Forward Pinellas.
Good morning, Beth Alden, Director of the Hillsborough MPO. Hi, Sandy Merman, Chair of the Hillsborough County Commission, Hart, MPO, TMA, whatever. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Harry Cohen, Tampa City Council and Hillsborough County MPO.
Pat Kemp, Hillsborough County Commission, countywide, Hart, MPO, T-BARDA, TMA.
Good morning, Mike Wells, Chairman of the Board of County Commissioners from Pasco County. Right here.
And John Villeneuve, MPO, Pasco.
Chris Cochran for Hart.
Jeff Seward apologizes for not being able to be here. I'll be the city.
Okay.
Peter Altman, City Councilman, Newport Richey. I'm also standing in for Jeff Starkey from the City of Newport Richey and MPO member.
Okay.
Hillary Lehman, Forward Pinellas staff.
Okay. Welcome, and welcome also to Mike, Jeff, and Peter. Is there? You may have been here before, but but the other two have not. We would like to know who is in the room today. If we could very quickly go around, please just give your name, and if you'd like, who you're with, and we'll do this in just a couple of minutes.
Dave Sobos, Tampa Bay Partnership.
Jim Davison from New Tampa, right up the street.
Jason Holloway with Senator Roussan.
Eugene FOT.
Bill Johnson, T-BARDA CAC.
Chloe Tony, a woman wearing many hats, HNTV, and Tampa Bay Next.
Welcome.
Roger Roscoe, FDOT District 7.
Ali Atifi, Pasco MPO.
Rick Hartman, City of Clearwater.
Darrell Henderson, Clearwater Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Mark Sharp, Tampa Innovation Partnership.
Bob O'Malley, Brightline.
Christina Kopp, Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority.
Michael Marino, West Shore Alliance.
Richard Moss, DOT District 7.
Beth Carson, DOT Public Information.
Christopher Gleason, Hillsborough County resident.
Karen Mossy, Hillsborough County resident.
Don Skelton with HW Lochner.
Omar Cruzada, T-BARDA intern.
Ann Kulig with the West Shore Alliance. Danielle Moran, HNTV. Brandy Mickless, Jacobs.
Milton Martinez, City of Tampa.
Alex Steady, Hillsborough County.
Chelsea Favreau, Forward Pinellas.
John Tewksbury, Beach Trend, Clearwater.
Tom Lucera, Beach Train, Clearwater.
Johnny Wong, Hillsborough MPO.
Sarah McKinley, Hillsborough MPO. Jean Duncan, City of Tampa.
Brian Bay, DOT.
Scott Prickle, WSP. Gabe Newell, DOT District 7.
Justin Willits, Tyndall.
Kyle Simpson, City of St. Petersburg.
Jeff Kramer with the Center for Urban Transportation Research. That's a cutter at the University of South Florida.
Ken Gal, Florida DOT.
Cassandra Borchers, PSTA.
Christopher Bell, Sunshine Citizens.
Welcome, everyone. Couple of words about the agenda, and then we'll jump right into it. And again, Senator, thank you for being flexible with your time. Sorry about the wait. This group was formed in 2013 to develop joint transportation priorities for the core urbanized areas of the Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco MPOs, the TMA, Transportation Management Area, in transportation parlance. The reason I mention that for today is that one of the items on the agenda after our discussion with Senator Roussan is a discussion of how this group does that. It was originally formed to work by consensus because that was the best way to get everybody to the table. So our agenda today opens the question of whether it might be time to revisit that structure. So we'll take public comment in just a moment, and then we will open it up to the roundtable discussion with Senator Roussan. After that, though, we will go into a discussion of how the TMA leadership group does its work and what kinds of guidelines and bylaws might make sense now that the TMA group has been essentially underway for a little over 4 years. So we'll go to that discussion at 10:15. After that, what we have is a series of updates on ongoing work in the region and on the part of the MPOs. The Regional Transportation Coordination Study hosted a workshop last week. We'll get an update on that. We'll get an update on the Strategic Intermodal Systems Cost Feasible Plan for this year, and much briefer updates on the Tri-County Long Range Plan outreach and the Hillsborough peer review of the BRT feasibility study. But the bulk, the main focus for today is our discussion with Senator Roussan and the restructuring discussion. We want to at least have a fairly open and complete discussion of how this group might best do its work at this point in time with the conditions that prevail now rather than the circumstances that prevailed in 2013. For those of you who are new, well, we'll add more to that in a bit. We typically take public comment at the beginning of each meeting. I have one public comment card. Is there anyone else who knows they would like to offer public comment? Okay.
Also, I just ran out a couple of modules here. I don't know if we can just kind of pass that around the group. I don't have any way to visually show that.
Just hand it there to the...
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. As usual, we don't have a... Pardon? Okay. We don't have a hard and fast time limit, but we ask to be as succinct as possible. And sir, he's deferring to you to go first.
Oh, okay.
Shoot for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, and state your name and affiliation for the record.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Christopher Bella. I live in Ybor City, 33605. I'm on here on behalf of my own district, Historic Ybor City. I'm also here on behalf of Sunshine Citizens. And right now, we're having some visuals being circulated around. We got from FDOT some renderings of the downtown interchange. And I'm here to talk about what I feel is unfairness. We know that recently there was a merger that was being looked at, combining the MPOs. There was $300,000 set for that merger to study that. Even though it was overruled federally, a lot of people have been outspoken against that. Being transportation, streets block, a lot of local leaders and jurisdictions. And it's the reason why is because we have so many needs locally. A lot of our trips happen within our county. It's well over 80%. It's the same thing with Pinellas. We're in the upper 80% as well. So a lot of the congestion is local. We know that gridlock is causing a lot of cost, a lot of hardship, and also just a lot of economic injustice. So with the images I'm passing around, earlier I got, in 2017, I was lucky to join with FDOT to go on a trip to St. Louis. And I thought, well, maybe I can start working with them. Maybe I can start saying, well, why don't we look at the downtown interchange and look at a plan where we can actually remove that, have some more transit, actually remove those barriers, and so we can help actually connect our historic districts and our cities. Well, after $30 million that's spent, and me just trying to plead with FDOT to say, hey, can we just do a interchange removal study and let's work on that together? They decided to spend $300,000 on an MPO merger. And right now I'm living in that, so those gray boxes you see near the Mount Puncheon Junction, I live in one of those gray boxes. So that's how they disgrace my neighborhood. That's how they disgrace my home. And I just can't believe like a transportation agency who is trying to resolve environmental injustice issues would proceed forward to do the same thing again. There's no difference. If you look at the existing interchange there and look at those images, there's no difference at all that we're going to. It is not fundamentally changing our problem of local gridlock and needs. So I'm trying to figure out why this big push of regionalism when we have all these needs and why we're allocating all this funding to study that when you're ignoring economic injustice in my neighborhood. So think about that. As you talk about this TMA bylaw and how to get this regionalism discussion going, think about people like me. I'm nearly 70% Native American, I'm Hispanic. We have a lot of black and brown people in my neighborhood. We have a lot of culture. I want to maintain that. So think about me. And I just wanted to touch base really quickly on our growth. And I'm really excited. I'm involved in my neighborhood association. I'm involved with the city. I sit on the Bar Latino Commission. I see projects come up every day. And we have over, and I know Harry's right over there, we have over $11 billion in new construction locally in our city. We need to figure out a way how to service that. I would like to have funding to preserve those developments as well. And so when we start focusing on fake BRT or just some like fake transportation process to connect our counties, we really need to circle back and say, look, we're investing so much money, so much dollars into these local jurisdictions. We need to support that. And lastly, I know I got to wrap up. I really appreciate what the staff of the MPO is doing. They have a lot of wonderful projects out there. We got 20 corridors that we have to fix. We're receiving over 1,000 crashes. Some of these corridors are near schools, and children are losing lives just trying to get to their schools, and it's just terrible. It brings tears to my eyes every time I look at the statistics. And we've been like number 1, number 2. It's the worst like county for pedestrian deaths. So I don't think anybody outside of Hillsborough County can understand that, but I'd be happy to personally work with them on statistics. But we need to fix our own problems first. And then we need to help other counties with just outreach and grassroots organization to help those counties, give them the tools so they can be informed making those choices. And maybe one day in the future we can connect, but right now we have to just take care of the problems we got. So I just leave that in your heads right now, and hopefully that will guide you to making the best decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, state your name and affiliation for the record and shoot for 3 minutes.
Jim Davison, citizen of Hillsborough County. And that was one perspective, because that's basically what's going on, is we have a lot of perspectives here. And I wanted to give you a perspective from another part of the county. And I wanted to sum up where that perspective sees you people at this time. So at this point in time, we were debating the premium transit study, but there isn't any consensus. So after spending $1.5 million and it telling you that a commuter rail from USF to downtown could not qualify for federal dollars, but the BRT on the shoulder of I-275 did, Hillsborough County didn't like that conclusion. So they are going to audit the consultant. Why didn't you just hire a cutter in the first place? Then the most important item on the priority list, next Tampa Bay, concerning I-275, I-4, and I-75, the number one to be protected against storms on the MPO, Hillsborough County MPO plan, had one management tool for congestion stripped out of it on North I-275, but that wasn't enough because the Hillsborough County MPO places a scenario in their Unified Work Planning Program that tears down 10 miles of I-275. I do not think that Pinellas or Pasco County think that's a good idea. So where does the BRT go then? It goes up Bruceby Downs to 54 in Wesley Chapel, across 54 to 19, down 19 to St. Petersburg. Other areas of the county, of the country, use value capture and TIF money to build highways. We can't even see the numbers for BRT or rail in this region. It's not included on any. So where are we? So we are really here, we're nowhere. We have no money. The plan changes all the time because consensus, you are never going to reach a consensus. As a physician, I can tell you, you are not going to reach consensus. And we're looking for some greater, firmer leadership from the state in letting this happen. So what do we recommend? We recommend you stop digging. In November, after the sales tax is defeated in Hillsborough County, a new alternative plan will be working its way in Hillsborough County, one that includes value capture. And the 25-50-25 leverage is about $1 billion, and that's conservative. Skip the next meeting in November. Try to get your own counties in order, just like this gentleman said. When you have viable money sources, you can decide what is going to happen with I-275 and CSX. You can try to do this all over again. Otherwise, you're just arguing over which lottery ticket to buy, and the people don't trust that you're going to pick the right one. So thank you very much for your time, but really, if you don't have the money and you don't have a plan, what are we arguing about? So I would recommend that you do away with the consensus, find another mechanism that we can move this along, and I appreciate your time, and everybody have a good week.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is our roundtable with Senator Rusan. I'll turn it over to the directors to set that up and introduce further the discussion.
Well, first off, thank you so much, Senator Rusan, for taking the time to sit down with us this morning. We've had a lot of conversations here within this group about how do we advance the needs for our tri-county area, and working with our legislative delegation is so important. And so we just want to have an opportunity this morning to talk with you and to hear from you about how you see the upcoming legislative session evolving, what topics you think might arise, and then how can we work together?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone here. I look forward to working with you and you working together. I would like to see one strategic, unified voice for Tampa Bay come out of these meetings. I also think the most effective way to draw down federal dollars is to work together regionally. I think there are many opportunities in the 19th session coming up. Not only have I sat as vice chair on the Senate Transportation Committee for the last 2 sessions, I think they did that on purpose, since I'm the only one of the 7 senators in Tampa Bay that has to decide whether he goes for Skyway Bridge or the Howard Franklin or the Gandy to get to areas of my district, since I represent Apollo Beach, Riverview, Brandon, and Ybor City. And I know the growing needs in those areas, particularly as the southern portion of Hillsborough County, and as it expands and grows, transportation becomes even more critical in those areas. I expect that when the new Senate convenes 14 days after the election and organizes and committees are set, I expect that I will be back on transportation. It is one of my priority requests. I want to support good policy statewide, first of all, when it comes to transportation issues. Statewide good policy. But I also want to push novel, creative, effective solutions for Tampa Bay that would include supporting things like BRT, dedicated BRT lanes, improved infrastructure, rail, or even Hyperloop. And I'm proud to say that the incoming Senate President, Bill Galvano, actually had a meeting in my office in St. Petersburg with the Hyperloop people to understand it as an alternative or a supplement to our transportation needs. We're uniquely situated with Senator Wilton Simpson in Pasco following Senator Galvano. The Bay Area will be well represented at leadership levels of the Senate where something can be done, actually done. Last year I worked to push a bill that would allow strategic intermodal system state dollars to be used for dedicated BRT lanes. That bill didn't pass, but it made the point to DOT and to others that Tampa Bay needed more funding. Since we've revamped T-Barter in 2017 and T-Barter is in the process of finding a new executive director, I look forward to working with this new leadership to create effective regional transit solutions. And that's what I really want. I want solutions. I'm tired of the, our speaker from the public talked about we won't reach consensus. But I think consensus is demanded and necessary. We need to get the voters behind the ballot amendment, the referendum. We need to educate the voters. We're worried about ballot fatigue. This will be the longest ballot since 1998 that the voters will see. And with all of the amendments and the referendums, it could be possible that they vote at the top of the ballot and forget to get down to the rest of it. So it's incumbent upon us and responsible upon us to make sure that voters educate themselves, are aware, and that they get behind this initiative. Funding is critical to keep up with the transportation demands. And in closing, I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I think we're well situated for the 19th session. I'm interested in creative, novel solutions. I'm interested in regionalism, not parochialism. We will take care of local if we take care of regional. And those are my comments.
So, Senator, I understand you have time for questions and discussion. Okay, so a couple of reminders. If you would put your name tent on end if you have a question or a comment for the senator. And also, again, please speak into the microphones today. I know there are not microphones at every place, but it will be important. So, questions or comments to the senator?
I'd like to just start with a comment, if I may. Thank you very much for those observations. I just wanted you to be aware that for the first time ever, the three MPOs are working on a jointly developed regional transportation plan. And I've used this analogy before, and some may tire of it, but it's like a three-ring binder where the first chapter or the first 50 pages is our regional plan, and then the next chapter or next however many pages will be the insert for each of the three counties to show how we're doing local transportation that complements regional transportation strategies. And in the past, we've had a regional transportation plan that we've developed jointly, but it's always been sort of a cobbled together plan taken from the already adopted long-range plans in each county. And this time we're actually looking at different scenarios, and we're looking at developing that plan jointly and then binding to a degree all of us together of the projects that are then in that regional plan. In other words, if Pinellas down the road wants to modify one of those projects in the regional component of that plan, we all need to agree. That's the goal, and I hope we can get there with this plan, and that's a significant step forward. So I just wanted you to be aware that we have a really good partnership, certainly at a staff level, and I think through forums like this, we're working on that partnership at the elected official level to really strengthen and keep our eyes on the ball for regional transportation. So it's a step. We've got a ways to go, but I think we are making good progress, and I just wanted you to be aware of that.
And the microphone, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you, Senator, for being here, and thank you for singing our prayers in Tallahassee. We really need you up there, along with Galvano and all the others that are working together. I would like to say, as the Forward Board Chair, if we could invite you to a roundtable at our board so that we could give you some of the things that we're either working on locally or the things that we're struggling with. For instance, as you know, we started this meeting late, and Commissioner Long, you were not the only one late, we were all late.
Thank you.
So it took me, from downtown Clearwater, it took me 2 hours to get here. And I'm not kidding with that. I left early because I thought I could get here and do a little bit of work on my computer before we start the meeting. So we do need your support and help, and if there's anything we can do locally to help you, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? And again, a reminder, just so we...
Yes, I apologize. So, I just want to thank you for your service, thank you for your comments. I know Senator Simpson is a dear friend, I know he speaks very highly of you, so I'm glad to see you here, and I look forward to talking to you before we're done. But you hit it on the head. I've only been in office 4 years, but we've always kind of been Pasco, Hillsborough, Pinellas. We're stronger together. We need to be together. We need to work together. It's all about a region, and what you said about take care of local, take care of the region. You're absolutely correct. So I really appreciate your input. This is my first time being here, but that is what it's about. As a region, when it comes to funding or a voice, it makes sense to do it together because we're going to be able to have more opportunity together. So thank you very much for being here and what you're doing up in Tallahassee for us all.
Commissioner Kim?
Thank you. I want to thank you for your service too. I am an outlier on this board in terms of my opinion about how things should go. I guess I know you said if we take care of the regional, we take care of the local. I believe the opposite. I believe if we take care of the local, then we can go to the regional. I think our local needs are far greater than our regional needs, and I think the whole regional thing, and I feel a little alarmed when I hear that Pinellas County would have to okay a Hillsborough County local project, because I think it's really a problem to not have not have local accountability. I think that's exactly what happened with our career source boards, and is a bad model for moving forward to the best possible things we can do. One of the speakers here stated that Chris Villa, that 80% of our commuter routes are local, or are local. It's actually much greater. We have a travel market study that this group and no transit group I've ever been on has been shown, and I don't know why, because FDOT paid $1.5 million to have that be part of the predicate for what we should do. And what it showed was that 91% of the commuters in Hillsborough County end up in Hillsborough County. 86% of the commuters in Pinellas County end up in Pinellas County. And Pasco County has quite a few commuters, less than 50%, but they come across and they go to USF and they go to other areas. And of the top 140 commuter routes throughout the 3 counties, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, the bridge is not one of them. But Oldsmar is. And I just want to say that I really think that we're have been barking up the wrong tree with this $455 million not real big BRT. It's express bus plan, but without the putting in the investment in the buses and moving people anyway, it's the $455 million. There's $430 million in parking garages, bus stations, Taj Mahal projects that include, for what reason I don't know, 9,000 parking spaces for only moving 330 people an hour at max if it was totally used. So I think it's a very flawed project that hasn't been looked at very much and not been discussed by this group and not really been considered very carefully at all. It was passed with about 20 minutes of consideration in the Veristic facts and hasn't really even been vetted since. But I'd like to see a huge, we have a regional dedicated corridor with CSX. We have CSX willing to provide that. I went to Sunrail just within the last month with Secretary Gwen. It was amazing what they're doing there with the dedicated corridor that goes through all of these areas. And at a cost of $12 million a mile, they converted the entire CSX Sunrail system. It could be done in 5 years, $12 million a mile. That's stations. They're moving thousands of people a day. It's growing all the time. And I really think we need to be looking and considering that. And we have proof of concept already. It's been done in Orlando and Miami. So I just want to, that's where I am.
Thank you. Beth?
Let me, yes, if I might. First of all, Commissioner Kemp, you probably are not aware of much of my history, but I've been an outlier most of my life. And I appreciate all critical voices, particularly constructive critical voices. I would not favor Pinellas having veto power over Hillsborough, but I would favor regional cooperation and collaboration that and local will get taken care of. Your voice on this body is important at arriving at solutions. And so I honor that. I don't look at it as getting rid of local accountability. I think local accountability is important. So I just want to honor your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beth and Commissioner Eggers.
Thank you. And we do have, we have a lot of local needs. We have a lot of regional needs. As we weave those things together, we have to use all of the resources that we have at our local level, and then we have to figure out how we're going to work together at the regional level to address those things. And I think that's what Whit meant when he was talking about our three-ring binder approach to our regional plan, that we would have a portion of that plan that is specifically for Hillsborough, that Hillsborough makes those decisions about. And we will work together on what is in that tri-county regional component, so that this group basically decides what are those facilities, what are those key projects that are so important to all of us that we need to all make decisions about them on an ongoing basis. And so I'm really excited actually about the outreach survey that we've collaborated on. It's called It's Time Tampa Bay, and it's online, and we are asking for everybody's feedback on that survey to determine what goes into that tri-county regional plan that affects all of us. We've gotten more than 5,000 responses on it so far, and we still have 6,000 now, okay, and 3 more weeks to go. So super excited about that. We have later on our agenda today a discussion about the Florida Department of Transportation Strategic Intermodal System, the 2045 Cost Feasible Plan. So what are the projects that the department anticipates being able to find funding for on those major regional corridors? And we have talked at this group for a long time about some of those major regional corridors. And one thing that we have come back to over and over again, and has continued to be on this group's priority list, is the interchange on I-275 in the West Shore area, the State Route 60 interchange. It is a $1 billion reconstruction. Right now, I think it is in that time frame for the SIS that starts in 2029. We have been working to advance this project for a long time. Right now, it is in that phase of taking another look at what the environmental impacts are, but that environmental impact review should wrap up next year if I'm right. And then do we wait another decade after that to do that reconstruction that we've all been supportive of for many, many years? I wonder if there's a way that we can come together to advocate for that project, for doing it sooner. I'm sure there are lots of needs in Orlando and Miami but we have waited for a long time, and I'd like to see us be able to work together to advance something like that.
Did you? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Beth. Commissioner Eggers and then Commissioner Mormon.
Again, Senator, thank you for being here. I think your comments are well received. I don't really think we have these two efforts, local versus regional, are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think that if you take a plane flight over Pinellas County, we have all kinds of projects going on in Pinellas County. We have not forgotten our local effort, but I do think that, to your point, Beth, about that project, the State Road 60, I think that is a critically important project that sits in Hillsborough County, which I'm happy to say would be probably my #1 project. So it is a regional effort to come together to try to get money for that project. I don't think, again, it's that we're then getting rid of our local efforts. And the second point that you just made, and I wanted to say to Commissioner Kemp, I never referred or thought or anything about you being an outlier. So if that's your thought, that's fine, but all I'm saying to you is that to your point, every voice up here is important, and I believe that. We may not agree on some things, so that's okay. I really do think this plan advancing forward with strength and conviction will only be happening with all of the voices, because there are going to be times where I may be a dissenting voice on something. It happens from time to time. Commissioner Long can tell you that. But we all have those different roles at different times, and so please, I welcome your comments. So I just wanted you to make sure you understood that. But I do think that our residents are demanding two things. One, that we take care of our local efforts, because if we abandon all of that for the regional stuff, I can tell you that they'll be knocking at all of our doors. On the other hand, all of these plans that we've had, these votes for referenda for local funding, have not passed. And the word I get always is, well, these large projects that you're talking about, not the local neighborhood projects, but the ones that, we don't want that. It doesn't make sense without looking at that regional plan. So they're going to demand that we have a nice regional plan that talks about how we advance in the next 5 to 10 years, and then more importantly, how we plan for that generation of our grandkids that are coming in about 20, 30 years. So we have responsibility. So I would like everybody here to be thinking about opportunities that we have, but also the responsibilities that we have for each other. Right? Hillsborough County Commissioners have responsibilities for my county, and I for yours. And so I would like that to be remembered, and also how we have responsibilities for intergenerational prioritization. It is critically important, and so let's disagree, let's battle it out, but let's keep moving this effort forward. I think we have a lot going on, a lot of leadership, as you say, coming up in the next few years that can really take us to a different level. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Merman and Commissioner Long.
Yeah, and I'll make this brief, but Daryl, I've known you for a while, and you've been a great advocate for the Bay Area. So I appreciate you coming today and just listening and reaching out. This has been a group that's kind of been under the radar. TMA is not like a long-term acronym that a lot of people are familiar with, but it is our regional effort, and what we have prioritized, I think, really has a lot of meaning and substance to it. But I do want to make a statement. Well, Commissioner Kemp, you're definitely not an outlier.
I don't know about that.
If you are one, I'm being one too.
I keep hearing speak with one voice.
But anyway, our DOT office and Secretary Gwen have been a breath of fresh air for us. And so when he comes to you with his list and his work plan, he has been communicating with all of our counties. I mean, it is right. It's stuff that I haven't been familiar with since I was on my commission. He's really taken a big step forward in a leadership role and really working with our staffs in the county and making sure what's on the work program is stuff that we really need, and that vice versa, that we're giving him stuff that we need too. So, and all of those projects connect into this regional effort that we're doing. So it all works together. So I just ask you, please work closely with him because I think we've got a really good relationship and he's definitely listening to our citizens too, not just us as elected officials, but our citizens. And I think this group has been great for conversation, but I think it's time that we start putting our foot down and saying this is what we want to get done. You know, all of us are not going to be here forever, so we better start thinking about what we're actually going to get done moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Wong?
Thank you, and thank you for those comments, Commissioner Merman. And Senator, I would just like to reflect that I've lived in the Tampa Bay area since 1972, and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council did its first transportation study in 1970. It's about this thick, and here we are, it's 2018, and we are still spending a lot of time and resources on studies. Today, right now, we are further ahead in our region than we have been in the last 50 years. And I think that's a powerful, powerful thought. So with that said, I just wanted to give you that little historic perspective. Secondly, I would be very interested, and I don't know if you, Whit, have the data or Secretary Gwen does, but this morning is not the first time that I've heard Commissioner Kemp reflect on the number of folks that go back and forth from Hillsborough to Pinellas. And I think it might be, I would love to know where those numbers come from. Number one, I've heard you refer to them a couple of times, Commissioner. And secondly, you know, last year when I was chair of the Tourist Development Council, I learned that we had 13 million people that came into our county in 1 year. That's a huge amount of impact on our infrastructure. I don't care how you cut the mustard. And I know they had to come across the Howard Franklin for the Gandy or, right? Because it's the only way you get from Hillsborough and the airport or the port out to Hillsborough or Pasco County. So somewhere there's a disconnect in the numbers. And what is really frightening to me, the consultants for the TDC indicated that within 5 years, there would be 36 million people coming over into Pinellas to our beautiful beaches. And if you have any doubt that those numbers are accurate, then just remember what's going on at Tampa International with their huge growth spurt. They just finished their first phase of a 3-phase plan, and they're already working on phase 2 because of the amount of people that they are anticipating coming here. Not to mention they keep adding international flights and international flights. So we're not just a sleepy little hollow in Tampa Bay anymore. We have reached prime time, and we have to act like and show that we're capable of being competitive. Otherwise, economically, we're going to be in the ditch for a very long time. I rest my case. Thank you for listening.
I apologize, I looked away, I don't know which of you had your hand up first. So Commissioner Merman and then, or excuse me, Commissioner Kemp and then Commissioner Merman.
No.
No?
I'd just like to respond to Commissioner Long's reference to the travel market study. The travel market study is the predicate for what we did with, or I didn't support it, but with this express bus project. It was a predicate, it's required, it's part of the study, it's on the TBARTA site. I have been on, as I said, the MPO, the TMA, TBARTA, and this group, or TMA and MPO, all these groups. We have not had that presented. I made a motion at our own MPO 3 months ago to get a presentation on that. Scott Pringle prepared that. $1.5 million, was spent, and that's part of that study. I've asked about it, not even knowing that such a thing existed. I asked about it many times. Don't we have to identify commuter patterns before we can talk about how we serve those commuter patterns? And I asked about it behind the scenes to all kinds of staff. I asked about it from the dais, and I was never told it existed. I went onto the TBARTA site and found it. I think it needs to go before the PSTA, I think it needs to go before HART, I think it needs to go before PASCO, I think it needs to go before all these boards. I think it should be a discussion and presentation, and I've repeatedly asked for it to be presented, and that's where all those facts come from, and they're from 2017, by the way. So I think it's extremely important that we look at that, and I just am stunned that we have not had that presented anywhere and have not seen it, and people are shocked by the statistics and say, where does it come from? It's the basic thing that all else should have grown from.
Thank you. Quick response, and then we need, I want to turn to the senator and see if we need to adjust our agenda a little bit.
Sure. So just quickly, I think some of that material was presented in the previous presentations on the regional transit feasibility plan, but there's a lot more there. And so we are going to be doing a deep dive into that analysis that was done and prepare a summary that will help lay the groundwork for this group's discussions about the Tri-County Long-Range Plan and what should go into that.
How about presenting the plan? It's only like 10 pages long. It shows you the top 140 commuter routes within the 3 counties. It shows you, I mean, it's everything about what we should be doing and why it was never presented and why it's been suppressed, which I truly feel it has been, because it didn't serve the narrative and it makes us not go in the right directions. I just don't know, and it needs to come. We need to have that information as elected officials before we even moved further to discuss anything else.
We will bring that back.
Okay. Senator and Secretary? I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to respond. I'd like to hear from the Secretary first. Okay.
Real quickly, certainly we're not suppressing anything. So
I'm
if you
not.
want a presentation,
Right.
we're fine with it. But
Right.
I did want to just, because it was kind of timely, and first, it's great to have one of our local elected officials in a leadership position in transportation. So we don't know each of you to understand our regional issues. We presented to the Hillsborough MPO earlier this week. We're going to be presenting to Pinellas and Pasco regarding our priorities. And in Tampa Bay Next, we listed our biggest priority is indeed the downtown, not the downtown interchange at I-4, but the area around State Road 60, the end of the Howard Franklin Bridge as we go into downtown. And it is a very expensive project, and we've got the SEIS that should be approved hopefully a year from now. But one thing to remember on that also is we're going to have Howard Franklin under construction soon. We'll have Gateway, which is already under construction. We're going to have the THEA project that's bringing the Gandy, as well as the other projects we did on the Gandy. It's starting to pull together a really nice network of not only regular general purpose lanes, but managed lanes. And we do believe that the managed lanes provide a great transit corridor. Is it perfect? Is it everything that everybody wants? No. But if we manage the lanes properly, we would have a great opportunity to provide reliable travel time for, call it express bus, call it BRT, call it what you want, but it's transit, and it would be, I think, a very valuable tool to the region. But by finishing that piece, we would be able to have that type of service all the way from downtown St. Pete through to the airport, through to downtown Tampa, and all the way up to State Road 54 and Pasco through the Veterans. So that is a critical piece, and I think all the counties have agreed that that was. So there is consensus on that. We're hoping to be able at some point to bring money back into the work program. We did have money in the work program for that at one time. When the Tampa Bay Express project was reset to Tampa Bay Next, that money was put to the side and as we figured out what we wanted to do. But I think we're going to be to that point real soon, and we'll be looking to try to get as much as we can for that. So we certainly support that project as a very important one for the whole region.
Thank you very much for this roundtable discussion. I am reminded that when confronted with nonviolence or violence, Dr. King said it was either nonviolence or non-existence. And I say that to say that it's either consensus and collaboration or it's failed competition. And if confronted with the choices, I'd rather have collaboration and consensus than failed competition between locals. I want to get behind action on studies. And stop, the voters know the difference between action and more studies. So I'm here to support. If it's novel, if it's creative, if it's effective, and it leads towards solutions, I'm your dog for it. But I think collaboration and consensus is a choice as opposed to fair competition.
Thank you again, Senator, for joining us and for your time and attention and thought on this. Are there any other final comments for the Senator?
I just want to be clear that when I said about suppression, I wasn't speaking about FDOT. And I wanted to say, because I have said this at the MPO, that I'm very, very happy with, I think FDOT's taken a real turn under your leadership, and I really appreciate how clear you are, how clear the diagrams are, so that all the elected officials don't believe that there's one less lane on the bridge, for instance. And I think that, I feel like there's a new attitude, and that wasn't at all something at your office, but I don't understand why on all these local boards we have not had a presentation of that, which is, it happened before you even came on, but a predicate to any of this.
Okay. Senator, you're welcome to join us for the rest of the morning if you would like, or, pardon?
That's the other one.
Okay, okay. I neglected to introduce Scott Lane earlier, and that is because he looks like this at the moment. He is on the speakerphone. Scott, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Okay. I understand we have you only until 11:30. And so what I'd like to do is move up the update on regional coordination structure and best practices to now, so that we can take advantage of your being here with us. And I'm unsure whether you or Jeff, who is here with us in person, will lead us off. He's approaching the podium, so I'm guessing.
I can take a swing at it.
Okay.
That will kick us off. That will kick us off.
Jeff will kick.
Thank you for moving us off. I'm part of a wedding party these days. I appreciate your consideration.
We appreciate your being here with us. We understand it's your daughter's wedding, so, or tomorrow is, but these things go on. So here is,
Like a royal wedding.
the computer is in the corner, so if you want to advance the slides, just aim that way.
Aim that way. All right. Good. Thank you for having me, and Scott. As Scott mentioned, my name is Jeff Kramer. I'm with the Center for Urban Transportation Research, Cutter, as we're fondly known, right, at University of South Florida. Thank you for having us. Recognize several of you who've attended our MPOAC Institute in the past, so hopefully we haven't failed you in that regard. And thanking Scott also with Stantec, who's actually the prime, he's the lead on this study, who is, I believe, on the way from Raleigh to Charlotte for his daughter's rehearsal dinner tonight. So this is how important that is, he's here. So we've been asked to come give you an update on the regional coordination structure. I'm reading this thing, but the title of the study, looking at regional coordination efforts and might there be a way to improve those efforts. We've heard it described a couple of times as an MPO merger study. I can assure you it is not that. We are looking at ways that regional coordination can be improved. And I will tell you, I'm always very reluctant, very nervous when a title calls best, uses the word best, because best really is in the eye of the beholder. And from perspectives, and something we preached at the Institute, you all have recognized it in, I'm sure, in your own MPO discussions, that not everybody at the table agrees, and what we're trying to do is determine what does the collective think is best, and then what might an approach be for achieving that. So I'm just going to walk through the background. I know I'm supposed to point that way. So a little bit of a project overview. Basically, the study consists of 3 phases. First was a review of existing conditions and directions. We talked to every MPO. We had a collective group of MPO board members, MPO staff. We've spoken with every MPO staff. Some of the commissioners, at least one elected official from each of the MPO boards. Not just the 3 in this area, but also Hernando Citrus, Polk, and Sarasota Manatee as well. That resulted in a tech memo that has been on the TBARTA website for several months that basically outlines the full extent of the processes that you have both internally and how you coordinate amongst yourselves, really looking at what we've come to refer to as the shell MPOs and the core MPOs. The core MPOs being those represented here today. We know why you're called the TMA Leadership Group, because in federal law, you have an urbanized area that covers all 3 counties, at least in part. Larger than 200,000 people, you are a transportation management area, TMA, under federal law, needing to coordinate together. The next phase was some case studies in peer practice, peers that we looked at, starting with a list of about 25 MPOs narrowed by our study management team with representation from all 3 MPOs and some stakeholders, down to 9, and then workshops and reporting out a synthesis of what we're learning to get down to some alternatives for attempting to look at how might alternatives be looked at for looking at regionally significant projects and how might that decision-making process as it exists now, well, how might it be tweaked or morphed moving forward. Just a little background. MPOs are all governed by similar rules. You have a variety of people involved. They are the same across, generally across the country. There are 409 MPOs across the United States. You all have a policy board. You're all staffed in some way. You all have products that you have to produce. Long-range plans, congestion management processes, transportation improvement programs. But boy, it's pretty general. And so the way that you've moved forward is all formed by a variety of contexts in your local jurisdictions, in your regions. Your board sizes, your board composition, different from place to place. How many MPOs cover your urbanized area changes from place to place. We sought out peers that helped inform in certain areas. There is no identical peer to this region. We've been looking for MPOs with large bodies of water in the middle. Well, we did include Hampton Roads, which is on both sides of the Chesapeake Bay, as an example. We looked at polycentric MPOs, Minneapolis-St. Paul, Dallas-Fort Worth, and the Salt Lake Ogden, which actually is 2 separate urbanized areas covered by 1 MPO. The Raleigh-Durham area, which is urbanized areas next to each other covered by 2 MPOs. So we attempted to include in our peers a variety, a mix and match of things that we thought we could learn and that would inform us going forward. And so how did we step through this? We want to remind you that it all started with the MPOs focusing on how can we, each asking, how can we do better? DOT stepping up with some funding and TBARTA acting as the fiscal agent, to administer the contract, but to only approve it, basically to accept it rather than approve it. But the final decisions are going to rest with the 3 MPOs in this area, and that means you. right, the board members of those MPOs. We went back to the original first workshop, which I did not attend, looked at it, and looking at that, tried to come up with themes, some ideas, topic areas. From those, we had 10 topic areas that we wanted to look at, both how are things done here, and also how are they done in our NPO peers, the peer studies. And then we're here today talking about it, going past the workshops that we just held last week. So here are the 10 topic areas. They're pretty general, but they come generally from the comments we heard in the May 2017 workshop, and were refined by the input not just of the SMT, the study management team, but also from those interviews we held with each individual NPO. How do you work, and how do we refine, how do we look at these things? We didn't put any particular emphasis on one of these over another, so we asked a broad range of the NPO peers about areas in all of these. Some of them, as you might expect, really didn't have a lot to say on some of these areas. Some had a great deal to offer in some of these areas. So we're listing the 9 NPOs, or regions, if you will, because they're not all just NPOs. Many of them have neighbors. We looked at Hampton Roads TPO. I would add Hampton Roads, just a little aside here. This is one of the very few NPO mergers that I'm aware of in the country. They merged in the early 1980s. There used to be 2 NPOs on either side of the Chesapeake Bay. They merged. Since then, I'm aware of only 2 other mergers in the entire country. Those have, well, I guess one is in progress in Connecticut as a result of their host agencies. Every NPO in Connecticut was hosted by their regional planning councils, and 2 of those councils shut down and were merged into their neighbors, and the NPOs didn't have a home anymore. So that those were really a very unique circumstance. Metro Plan Orlando, looking at our neighbor down on 4, a 3-county NPO with 2 urbanized areas within its boundaries. Metro in Portland, Oregon, a very unique structure, working collaboratively with its neighbor to the north of the Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington, a separate NPO, 1 urbanized area. So 2 NPOs, 1 urbanized area. The Wasatch Front Regional Council, which is in Salt Lake City, 2 urbanized areas. So polycentric in the sense that Ogden and Salt Lake are far enough apart that they are separate urbanized areas. And then moving on, you can see the Raleigh-Durham area, Nashville, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Dr. Cobb, one of the best acronyms out there in the Denver Regional Council of Governments. At this point, we're going to discuss what we found in this, that did not go the way I wanted it to. Could somebody go ahead and relaunch the, reactivate it, and put it on the next slide? Would be great.
So what am I doing?
Putting it back into presentation mode is.
So while he's doing that, could I ask you a question?
Of course, and then I was going to turn it over to Scott.
Is the common denominator in all of those, what I call success stories, for lack of a better word, is the common denominator that they had a coordinated MPO that spoke with one voice in one region?
No, not necessarily, but that they are urbanized areas who do work collaboratively, whether it's through one NPO or multiple NPOs, that we can learn from to inform us going forward. Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. First of all, can everybody hear me okay? That's the first question.
Can you hear him okay?
Yeah.
Okay. They can.
Is this any better?
Yes. Much better.
Oh, good. I'll leave it like this. So yeah, I think the question was, was there a common denominator, particularly concerning, joint kind of structure? No, I mean, we started off with, I don't know, Jeff, how many was it, over 30 shortlisted from the 410 or so that are in existence now in the U.S. And what we tried to do was find NPOs that we thought, based on our knowledge or research or whatever, that address those 10 topics that were on the previous slide, and those 10 boxes that Jeff went over. For example, I guess my MPO, when I used to be the director of the WellNec, Capillary MPO, shares a common boundary with another MPO, has since the beginning, I suppose, next door with Durham. So that, I wouldn't necessarily call that a common denominator. I think the common theme is that these are, generally speaking, pretty complex MPOs when I look at this list, and I think that definitely we thought, at least going into it, they would have something to offer in terms of helping to educate us on those 10 topics in the last slide.
I would also add that not all, but most of these are comparable size population. Commissioner Kemp?
Yeah, I had asked you about this before, and I think it's important to make clear, because there's this narrative, and I think it's mythology, that somehow by combining MPOs we would get more money. I don't know what that refers to, but I think it's, and I asked why we didn't include 3 different counties, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach all have their separate MPOs. They have much less developable land, and they're much tighter together, and they have 95, and they have all kinds of routes going through them. But they each have their own MPOs and their own projects. For instance, their express bus that runs from downtown Fort Lauderdale to downtown Miami, pretty much modeled on what we have here. You know, the toll roads actually pay for the bus service there, but the bus service is the Miami-Dade Transit Service does their buses, the Broward does their buses, they coordinate it, but that's the way it goes. It makes sense to me. But I think they are getting the most money in our state. And I asked you about that because these are 3 separate MPOs. Each of them are doing well in terms of their funding, and it's not looked at as they're being competitive. They're each being successful in what they put forward and do. So I just would like you to comment on that. The other thing I just think is important to know, the city of Gainesville, has its own MPO. There's 3 little counties and the Panhandle all next to each other. I forget what they are. They don't even use their county names. They all have their own MPOs, even though it would make much more sense in terms of that for them to be merged. But could you talk about those examples, especially because our South Florida is getting far more in resources, and they have their 3 separate MPOs.
I can't talk about both of those conditions. The South Florida condition is actually relatively similar to what we have here. They operate collectively through the South Florida Transportation Council, a group they call CEFTEC, which is something similar to the Chairs Coordinating Council here in this area, although at some level it's maybe even a little bit more like the TMA leadership group in that it's just the 3 counties. The membership is significantly smaller than the CCC. But they do have separate MPOs, and they started the same way that you did, as separate urbanized areas in the 70s when MPOs were first formed. And over time, that area, as decided upon by the census, merged following the 1990 census, or the 2000 census, became a single urbanized area, much like happened here when the Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater urbanized areas were merged following the 1990 census. And so since then, they have worked cooperatively through an arrangement similar to the CCC to do regional studies, to do some regional planning, as Wade and Beth were discussing, that you all are embarking on. But they do have separate bus systems that are run by their counties. They have separate airports. They have a lot more people than we have. And they are, like us, geographically constrained, at least at some levels, although we can expand eastward and northward. They can't go in either. They can only go north and maybe a little bit south, right? So they do work cooperatively in the sense that, as a peer, we did consider looking at Broward, but they are so similar to you, in some ways there's less to learn from them, other than they don't share resources particularly well, unlike MetroPlan Orlando, which does share its resources and works collaboratively with its neighbors through something called the Central Florida MPO Alliance, and with its neighboring MPO to the north, the River to Sea TPO, which covers Volusia and Flagler counties, and they work cooperatively toward funding for Sunnyvale.
Which makes sense
So-
because Orlando has one single major city, that's the
Well, just
center.
remember, in that case, their work, the Sunrail extends up into Volusia County, and
Right.
they're one. But the MPO, neither of the MPOs are a funding partner. They are just the forum in which the discussion happened. To talk briefly to the Panhandle experience, when those urbanized areas were formed, the Pensacola urbanized area formed first. The Panama City urbanized area second, along with Okaloosa-Walton, which is around Destin. They were separate and all staffed. It really was a matter of staff capacity when those MPOs came into existence. Who could do the work? And the only agency that had enough planning capacity to do the work was the West Florida RPC, the Regional Planning Council. So all three MPOs are staffed by one staff, the same staff. Those people do a lot of meetings because they have 3 MPOs, 3 tech committees, 3 CAC, 3 bicycle pedestrians, 3 long-range plans, 3, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad idea, but they do it well, and they have a lot of staff time dedicated to that. So they do work cooperatively, and the Panama City, that urbanized area, is quite a distance from the other two. And they also don't, I-10 runs well north of the population centers in those areas. So the Okaloosa-Walton and Florida-Alabama MPOs work much more closely together. The boards do, meet cooperatively. They have a once a year symposium, conference, if you will, where they come together and discuss issues of particular regional importance. They're very focused on, I think it's US 98 and I hope that answers.
Yeah, so basically the 3 counties in Florida, South Florida, who get the most resources and have the most resources are not merged MPOs. And they're separate, and yet they get that. And, you know, I just think that there's this mythology somehow that, you know, somehow we merge, and I don't know where this money comes from or why it would come, just by virtue of a merger, because that's...
We shouldn't forget, and we need to move forward with time.
Right, just because we only have Scott for a limited amount of time,
Sure.
if you have questions to him, we can't ask them when he's gone. So,
Right.
let Jeff and
Yeah.
Scott finish up.
Scott, I think we're ready to move on to the slide that discusses what came out of the peer review. If you want to talk to that, just let me know when to advance to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I'm going to add, John, is that, you know as well as I do, that when you and I and Tom, we've also discussed this, I think, not very, supported assumption that, a merger MPO necessarily equates to more dollars. And so I think we're kind of in agreement with that. I mean, one doesn't necessarily lead to the other, for sure. So you are the slide that says what came out of this all so far?
Yes, that's what we're on.
Okay. So, we're not looking to just this 9 MPOs for information, but I did want to share with the group some of the things that came out of this. There's the first and second reports combined are nearly 150 pages. There's a lot of information. What I choose to present here, Jeff does, doesn't necessarily mean that we get the most important thing to you, but I think these are the things that were discussed internally and with the study management team steering committee as well. So revenue, obviously, is always a big issue. A couple things we discovered there, not discovered, but we're reminded of there. NPOs necessarily build things. And, even when they do get more money, they don't always manage the dollars. There's usually, or often anyway, some other regional authority that manages, for example, toll revenues or other kinds of specialized state allocations. It's not always the NPO, with their hands on the dollars. But they do still, however, have authority over project selection and prioritization. free to jump in here too whenever you want. On a local and regional topic, this is a big one because the NPOs in general, whenever they, every 10 years or so, they think about expanding perhaps, and in many places this topic of, local voice versus increased regional voice is not a strange topic at all. It happens quite often. Different NPOs have tried different ways of resolving this, or at least making it palatable, I guess is the way to put it. Different mechanisms and formulations for multi-governmental representation by one person or one agency representing others. A lot of times you see, for example, a county with many smaller municipal governments inside of it representing municipal governments. You see rotating seats sometimes, things like that. Sometimes the voting structures can help offset, the dilution of the local voice. It's not for me to necessarily say one way or the other if that's true or not. I think we have learned some interesting things. I think we were reminded again of that. There's some interesting structures out there. Particularly, again, I mentioned Hampton Roads, which has sort of a three-pronged voting process. It's not just the number of members in the seats at the meeting place like you're in now. It's also the representation and quorum requirements that all kind of blend into it to try to make sure that at least the voting structures are more or less fair. Seems to work for them. And in fact, we do these kinds of studies now, and going years back in the past, I think one thing we found to be pretty consistent is that people are fairly happy with their voting structures the way they have them. Maybe they've undergone some change recently, or at the very least, they don't think it's worth the pain to change them. And that leads right into resolving disputes. So I think this one gets a lot of attention. What happens if this or that agency doesn't really like a decision and they're shouted down or voted down or whatever. Again, going back many years, probably 2 decades now of similar kinds of work and just personal experience, professional experience for myself, and I think Jeff too, these situations where there's this hard line dispute that people come to a shoving match, it really doesn't happen very often at all. It's extraordinarily rare. There are NPOs that, for example, we did this a while back, maybe you're still like this, whether or not, Northeast, where every decision has to be 100% consensus, and if you don't have that consensus, it gets tabled and goes back to the next month, to the next meeting. So, and I asked them, really, does that actually work? And the fellow said, yeah, it works. I mean, we've never really had an issue here. So, there's all kinds of voting. There's constant weighted voting, where every vote's a weighted vote. There's all kinds of systems and craziness. I will say that the weighted voting thing, there's not necessarily a majority that do that. Part of this gets into, wrapped up into state legislation and directives too, but generally speaking, weighted votes, unless it's a required thing for every vote, it doesn't happen very often. Again, because the disputes don't happen all that often. And I don't know, Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's accurate. Most of what the MPOs were familiar with, and certainly the ones that we talked to here, said that whether or not they had weighted voting, that almost every decision ultimately ends up being approved by a vast majority of the board members.
Yeah, I've been a director of 3 MPOs over a period of 12 or 13 years, and I remember one, split vote. And this is a pretty contentious area here too. So, engaging the public. So this is a big one, and I think we need to give a nod to one of your MPO directors here, Beth Alden, for separating this out uniquely. We had it kind of wrapped up, it was sort of implied that thanks to the work of the city management team, this was a good topic to identify. Anyway, interesting. I mean, I think big MPOs, when we say big MPOs, a lot of people, a lot of jurisdictions, several counties,
two things. First, what we discovered, I think Scott's right, the focus may change somewhat. It's that balance between covering more ground and having more people to cover it with. One thing that we found interesting, several of these MPOs are also part of something bigger, right? They're either a council of governments or regional planning council. And one of the interesting things we found was, for example, in Nashville, they have a dedicated social equity plan. That's all this person does is focus on social equity. But that's not just an NPO function. That's also for economic development and housing and stormwater, I think it's, or solid waste issues, and a variety of issues, because they're able to, they have Department of Commerce grants, they have HUD grants, they have the NPO planning grants, and they have to work on a wider range, not to mention whatever they're required to do by state statute in their state. And so they have much larger staff, and they're able to have a social equity planner by virtue of having a bigger staff. So is that better or worse than having a smaller staff who need to be more generalist and be able to cover more ground, or having a larger staff in a little bit larger area, but having specialists who can focus specifically on those issues? I wouldn't necessarily say one's better or worse. They are different, and that is your decision to make which would be better, which would better serve your area. Another observation in this also, in terms of engaging the public, more than one of the MPOs is in control, directly control, instead of submitting a list of priorities to their DOT that does programming, they are in fact directly programming funds that are directed to the urbanized area, and they do so through a call for projects. And so the call for projects requires local vetting of the projects that are going to come forward. And so the NPOs told us that they rely on that local vetting structure to provide local engagement for that decision-making process. So while the NPO itself isn't necessarily carrying on the public engagement for all the projects that are under consideration, the local jurisdictions that are competing for those funds through the call for projects are. And that's under the purview of the NPO's guidance and structure. So just a completely different structure to something we do here, but something that could be considered going forward. That's all I have to add to that, Scott.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, thanks. That's well put. So other notes, this is the kind of category that's a catch-all. Some of these other topics and things we've found. I encourage people to kind of flip through the report a little bit. Land planning is a topic. There are some NPOs that have taken more of a leadership role than others. I mean, Metro and Portland is sort of the claim to fame. There's the old joke about Portland NPO that hopefully no one will get back to them. But there's 200 planners at Metro, and 100 do things. 100 go to conferences, talk about what 100 do. They just talk about it all the time. But to their credit, they do a lot of planning, integrating land and transportation. Other ones like the Minneapolis-St. All NPO up there, they also take kind of an operational kind of take on it. Their plans include things for utility extensions and all kinds of other things that aren't transportation, and there are transit operators up there. So, but generally speaking, they're a forum. They help bring people together, like regional planning districts or councils of government, however you want to term those things. But they're not necessarily a leadership role, usually. Which, again, like Jeff said, it could be good or bad depending on your viewpoint, I suppose. Bigger may not always be better, but as we pointed out, when you engage in public discussion, sometimes you get more staff to devote to specialized things that are really important to you. And I'd certainly encourage, through this process to think about that a little bit. One interesting thing we found in 2 of the 9 NPOs was having a state legislator represented on the policy board as an actual member there. That was Hampton Roads and Wasatch Front in Utah. And in both cases, they felt like on the balance it was really positive, and in fact helped them have a stronger tie to their state delegation or the state legislature that in fact had reaped some tangible benefits. In terms of revenue or, moving projects along, or maybe a little bit more authority with the state DOT. There's different takes on that. Not all of them are easy
you. I would simply remind you that that report is on the TBARTA website, and not only attempts to summarize what we learned under each of these topic areas, but additionally, the appendix, which is sadly enormous, includes the entire transcript of the interviews we conducted with each of those MPOs, and we conducted at least one additional stakeholder interview with each of those MPO areas. So if you have any questions, feel free.
The only correction I would add, Jeff, is that it's not necessarily, what you might call a transcript, it's our summary notes.
It's our summary notes.
That are pretty raw in those discussions. It's not a verbatim kind of transcript.
How about, in the interest of time, we move forward, Scott, to the next, to what came out of last week's workshop number 2. And so I'm going to advance the slide.
Yeah.
We've got the nice picture up right
colorful
now.
John that was produced there, which is interesting to me. But anyway, we just got this information ourselves this week. So what I'm showing you is kind of new to us. We're still in the process of digesting everything that was said, but it's been an interesting process. I've never been through such a thing anyway. It was interesting to be part of it. It seemed like people felt hopefully their time was worthwhile. We chopped up the discussion there for the groups that broke apart and gave their input into 3 big topics: great MPOs, great partnerships, and great projects. Obviously, these things kind of overlap to a degree. The text on the slide here, workshop number 2, great MPOs, is reworded from what's actually written in the real-time record, is what they call it, out of the collaborative labs. So again, I guess this information has been or will be distributed pretty soon. So there's a lot more detail behind all this. But a couple of things kind of popped up to me as I was putting this together and thinking about it. Certainly, on certain topics, it's really advantageous to have a number of voices speaking with more or less the same message on certain projects or certain issues that are really important to the group. That being said, the very next bullet talks about making sure we get meaningful input to shape those opinions and those talks and those talking points from citizens, businesses, and many other stakeholders and stakeholders too, I guess. As you're developing that common voice and common message, and not everything can be common, but input was really important, and you'll see that in other slides. So what does successful regional coordination mean? They were pretty bottom line pragmatic people. Decisions really get made and progress really happens on the ground. But that happens through a legitimate, transparent process with community buy-in, and that's an MPO that does these things on this slide is at least a good, if not a great MPO.
We're on great partnerships.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Moving on. Great partnerships?
Yes.
So moving on to great partnerships. MPOs have been around a while, and one thing that's very common is that the very nature of MPOs is they have to be collaborative to work well. The only thing that is you can only point to and say that's an MPO is a policy board, and the policy board is comprised of local and state officials and transportation service providers that come together and meet periodically to discuss things and vote on things. So that's an MPO. That's very formation. It is a partnership. But including this slide, opportunity for current agencies to think more regionally is important. They could have a regional organization, more regionally minded organization can have land use development framework for decision making that integrates transportation and integrates those agencies that serve, maybe located in one place, that definitely serve other MPOs and other counties like the Tampa area airport. Not necessarily have a voice on local boards outside their very own jurisdiction. I think that was a pretty interesting point, very articulate point. Better work relationship between MPOs, obviously, that's what we're kind of talking about here, as well as FDOT, Florida DOT. I will tell you just my own experience going back in the study and many others is that relationship with the state DOT is absolutely crucial. It doesn't mean you always have to agree with them and everything, but you've got to have a mechanism for working things out, a good relationship for working things out. We also found out, when we're talking to the peer MPOs, for example, that a lot of this depends on the people. You can have the exact same structure with different people, that doesn't work so well. You've got to have people that know how to collaborate, know how to get things done, and that's their primary interest. And that was sort of spoken to in this meeting as well. And taking into account, you received again all perspectives representing all communities, the public engagement, public input component, including the business community and other NPOs that have a lot of different interests, not just transportation and mobility, but aesthetics and jobs and wages and making the region more competitive with other regions as a whole, so that you guys can compete with us up here in Raleigh. So, any questions about partnerships?
Doesn't look like it, so we'll move on to the next slide.
Cool. So great projects, I guess is the rubber hitting the road here. So to me, this kind of reiterates, maybe people are tired of this, it reiterates some of the things, the points that were made, but framework of all the partners are represented. I think an interesting topic here is aligning local funds and federal funding with the projects that have common interests. But again, identifying, prioritizing those projects have to come with early, often, and authentic, it's a great word, authentic public engagement. That stood out to me too, and it's something I also personally agree with, and professionally. Great projects don't just throw money at a problem, they maximize the scarce resources you've got in public and private dollars, and leveraging those to have a greater sway in getting projects done. We talked to one of the ones that was interesting for strange reasons maybe, but was the North Central Texas Council of Governments, just think Dallas. Big MPO, a lot of jurisdictions, and one of the things the director told us point blank was, look, we move money around a lot here, and we would not be able to do that, if we were under other kinds of jurisdictional structures. So I think, some of that's kind of telling, and I think some of that was spoken to here in this meeting, which is interesting. Region Star for implementation. I'm not sure I'm totally agree with that. I think you guys are actually doing pretty good. But changing behavior and creating more trust. Again, we see this notion that personal and professional relationships, more interaction. There are NPOs that have, once a month breakfast meetings, just informal to discuss things. Maybe they have a loose agenda, maybe not. Just to kind of air things out and get things moving and kind of get things off ground zero. The places that do that well seem to do pretty well. That was a really quick overview of the 6-hour-long meeting. Are there any questions or any other thoughts that people attended that are in the audience there want to add?
Again, just a reminder, put your tents up if you have questions or comments.
So just to bring this kind of back to where we're going next, and thank you for that great overview. Looks like October 29th is going to be our third workshop that we're planning. And so you have a lot of really good information, and I think our challenge now is how do we take that good information from case studies and break it down into several different options for maybe alternative recommendations for how we strengthen regional coordination. And I'm assuming that we'll have those options presented to us at the October 29th meeting. And then I'm further assuming that we'll use that workshop to sort of sift through those options and maybe hone in on a preferred option, and then develop a recommendation by the end of the year. And I think your charge under the scope is to develop a single recommendation. And then that recommendation will be made available to all the MPOs and other partners by the end of the year, more or less. The MPOs are now kind of targeting a series of individual workshops that they will each have in that second or third week of January. And what we need to do is get a sense pretty quickly if you all will be ready, or if we will be ready and have adequate time to review after the October 29th workshop any recommendation that comes forward. The hope would be that we can take those up at our, say, January workshop, January board meetings. And then if there's any kind of action needed from the MPOs to either endorse or accept or approve the study recommendation or approve with modifications, we would need to take that up in the spring. so February, March timeframe. Is that everybody's understanding? Is that consistent, or are there questions about that timeline? I think that's maybe would be a good topic to wrap this up.
I would only add to that, the timeline did not anticipate the delay of workshop number 2 from the very beginning of June to the very end of August. So there is a gap there that was unanticipated. We are targeting, like you said, to try to move forward with the information gained now to the October 29th workshop with some alternatives based on what we've heard and based on what we've learned. And then at that workshop to gain insight of those participants, what are the trade-offs, what are the, with an understanding of what those trade-offs are in each of those alternatives presented, and how do people feel about that, so that we can then hone in on a single approach for recommendation that then is presented to the T-BARTA board only for acceptance. Yes, we did what we were supposed to do. And then it's up to the MPOs in a process that will play out, I am sure, over a longer period, much longer period of time. That's beyond the scope of this particular study. So this is basically the start of that conversation that you all will have going forward after that.
I would just like to suggest that I think it would be helpful to have you or Scott, or both, at those January workshops, if that's the time frame. We're trying to coordinate those.
We're going to need to have that.
I understand.
We've
There
not
may be
had that
administrative discussion.
Administratively, that is,
Okay.
the current contract ends in December.
Gotcha.
Just one point of information, Port Tampa Bay has agreed to host the meeting, the workshop on October the 29th. So the announcement should go out soon.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
You have
Good luck this weekend, Scott.
I'm gonna need it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I think we can just press the phone icon. Or, yeah. No, that's.
Yep.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, quick time check. You have about a half hour left. No one anticipated the bridge issue this morning. Left on the agenda are the restructuring discussion, the update on the SIS cost feasible, and a couple of much briefer updates on the long-range plan outreach and the peer review in Hillsborough.
I would just like to suggest that we go to the restructuring discussion and have it briefly, because everything I've been waiting to say, this all ties together. So, I think we need that piece in order to be able to have our discussion.
Okay. Is that your sense as well? Okay, I know we would like to say a couple of things to sort of set the stage, and I would as well. So, Whit, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to get this item started and thank Raphael for really what's been almost 5 years of service as our facilitator for this group, and I think it's really been very helpful. When we were in 2013, 2014, we were figuring out how to respond to the directive to merge the MPOs, and this was the response, was to create this collaborative body. And, a lot has changed, and I think as staff directors, we've had conversations about how we can strengthen this process from a planning technical standpoint, how we can strengthen this process from a staff working process, and just the fact that we've agreed to put together a single regional long-range plan together is a significant step. And what we found is that as we've strengthened that staff level coordination, it's forced us into having to take some votes. And the process we've had thus far has been really more by consensus and collaboration. And I think we're, if we really want to listen to what Senator Rusan said, which is moving from study to action, that just necessitates a little more of an affirmative vote at this level. And there's a lot of different ways that we can explore in coming months of how to continue that process of strengthening the TMA. So I think we're wanting to have this conversation at the staff level primarily to recognize that evolution and that we are working better together than maybe we've ever worked together. Raphael, I know you've got some words of wisdom to impart to this group. That
Some words,
I just wanted
anyway.
to start with that.
I very much agree. I want to start by saying I very much agree with that. I have had a chance to observe, not only to work with the group, the TMA leadership group, but to observe staff cooperation as part of that work and to help with that cooperation at times. And both from a policy level and from a staff level, you're in a completely different place than you were in 2013. And that's largely because of the people who are around this table now and others who've preceded you. The staff level cooperation is at an entirely different level than it was in 2013. The regional or the 3-county LRTP is one example of that, but there are many, many others. And I think it's very healthy for the group to think about what its needs are now as opposed to what they were in 2013 when the current structure was put in place, and to go in a direction that responds to current needs. I think there's probably a little bit of value in going over why the structure you now have was put in place, because it does suggest some other things that have changed and that may be relevant to how you want to proceed going forward. So back in 2013, we typically say this process started in 2013. It started in December of 2013. So you really got underway in 2014. But the reason you have the procedures you have now is because in 2013 there was basically an extended and difficult conversation about the shape of the table. You at the time were 3 very different counties, you still are, but you're even more different then. And there was a lot of concern about constituting this as a typical board with either weighted representation or weighted voting or both. Pasco was concerned about that, but also Hillsborough and Pinellas. There were different views in the Hillsborough and Pinellas MPOs about the wisdom of merging. And people were very cautious about giving away any of what they perceived as their prerogative, and very cautious about acceding to the possibility of being overruled. So in a workshop in, I think, January of 2014, it may have been Ray, actually, Ray Chiramonte, your predecessor, and someone you all know, who made the suggestion that if this was going to be useful, it really had to have support from all 3 counties. So the weighted representation and voting didn't matter. Why not just set it up as a commitment to collaborate with equal representation from all 3 counties, regardless of population, and with a consensus rule, because if there wasn't consensus, it wasn't going to do any good. So you might as well acknowledge reality. So it was, you know, the senator's comments this morning resonated with me. The options at the time were very much either consensus or failed competition. There wasn't a lot in between. And so this was set up that way, with 3 members, 3 representatives from each county, or each MPO, I should say, with a pure consensus decision-making rule. Something else that is relevant at this point to how this process was originally set up. We use a passive voice a lot here. It was set up. It was actually set up by the 3 MPOs as a joint advisory committee to the 3 MPOs. So you who are members are here by the designation of your MPOs, serving on what is essentially an advisory committee to all 3 MPOs. So your guidelines and ground rules aren't really up to you. They are up to the member MPOs. So what we can do today is have a discussion, consider staff recommendations, get your input, but the actual decision has to go back to the MPOs, as do all your recommendations. And the decision of how to structure this is an MPO decision, not a TMA decision. So that probably needs to be clear. There's a couple more things I want to say, but Harry, you have a comment about
No,
that?
I'll wait till you're done.
Okay. I would say that the structure you had worked very well, probably for 3.5 years, through June of probably your decision-making meeting in 2017. The effort wasn't to merge the three MPOs or even to merge their processes. It was to develop a common message. The words common, one voice have been used here. That was the aspiration for some, but at a minimum, a single message. Not a single voice necessarily, but a single message. And you were very successful in agreeing on priorities and in organizing to promote those priorities with the legislature, with the Congress even. There was one conversation that was piggybacked on a visit to DC. And this, your discussion mirrored the discussion in the region, I think. Your first year, I've said this a number of times, your first year, you talked about priorities in very traditional transportation terms, Project X from point A to point B. By your second year, your priorities were much more narrative and regional in a way that someone who isn't involved in transportation could understand. This group was instrumental, probably, in the momentum behind the regional premium transit feasibility study, whatever its current name is. And so you played a significant role, and as a result, there is much greater coordination at the staff level. There's a much clearer voice for the region. It's not the only regional voice in transportation, but a significant one. So anyway, as Whit said though, as you've moved through the last couple of years, the pure consensus rule has served you less and less well. In 2017, sort of threw a bunch of stuff in the pot to get to consensus, and this past year, there was enough disagreement that essentially all you could agree on was moving your priorities forward from 2017 with a couple of minor tweaks. So, I want to review the current guidelines and some of the options and the staff recommendation, but I know we have to...
I'm going to wait till you're done with that.
Okay, Commissioner Merman, do you want to wait till we're done with that, or do you want to... Oh, yeah? Okay. Okay. All right, so your current guidelines are these on page 4. And it's probably worth touching on them and giving you a chance to look over them. This is all you have in the way of bylaws. You do not have anything other than this. The Tampa Bay Transportation Management Area Leadership Group, this is what the page looks like. Right before the proposed dates for next year. Is that it? Page 7. I put my glasses somewhere, obviously. There we go.
Around your shoelaces untied on the hip for your trip.
Thank you.
Sure.
I will tie it before I get up. Your purpose statement's pretty clear. At the time, there was a role for a TMA specifically, Transportation Management Area Forum, not performed by any existing organization. The TMA is more focused, much more focused than the CCC and than T-BARTA was even then. The focus is on major cross-country transportation markets and traffic movements, and helping the Tampa Bay metropolitan area speak with one voice in discussions of regional transportation prioritization issues and financial resources. I think the assumption was, in fact, that merger wasn't necessary to get stronger financial support, but that one message and one voice would be helpful, and those are very different things. You know, merger, one message, one voice, but that the one message, one voice would be helpful to you, and this group was, from the start, a regionally focused body. Membership. This has caused some folks around the table a little bit of frustration over time. But even with the consensus rule, the decisions were to be made by consensus of the MPO appointed members. So there were only 9, quotes here, voting members throughout the time of the TMA. The TMA has a number of non-voting members who are listed here and others who've been invited, the transit agencies and others who've been at the table in the discussions, but it was set up as an advisory committee to the MPOs, and it's the MPO representatives who have a say in whether there's consensus or not. And then there's some logistical items there. Some of the things that you might want to consider in restructuring the TMA leadership group are on the previous page. Representation and voting for purposes of adopting recommendations. When this was set up, the only way to get people to the table was to agree to the full consensus rule with equal representation. I think we've evolved to the point where no one's going to run away from the table because of some modification to that. I don't think there is still, I think there is still not support for fully weighted voting or representation. I think some of you and your MPOs have discussed that, and the sense is if you're going to do that, you might as well merge the borders. But there is a, you lost there, Harry?
No, I don't agree with that, but I'm going to
Okay, all right, well, but as I said, there's not full support for it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, you know, the issues there. But there are other options. You can require each MPO to support a recommendation for it to be valid. You can leave it up to the MPOs how they support or not a recommendation, or the staff recommendation is that 2 of each MPO's delegation have to support a recommendation for it to be approved as a recommendation of the TMA leadership group. So a majority of each MPO's representatives on this group with a continuation of the equal membership representation rule. That's the staff recommendation. Is that correct? Another issue is whether you have a chair or not. A chair has 2 roles. So as you think about this and the staff recommendation, think about these 2 roles. One is, the chair may have more than 2 roles, but there are 2 that are especially relevant here. One is moving you through a discussion and decision-making process. But another is providing moral authority, if you like, a little bit of a nudge towards agreement or cooperation when the group might not be headed that way. The staff recommendation is a rotating chair and vice chair arrangement, with the vice chair for each meeting becoming the chair at the subsequent meeting. So sharing that role among all 3 MPOs in a rotating way. There are different ways to structure that. 2 other things that I would highlight, and then I'll open it up for discussion. You are going to be faced going forward with a little bit of a tension between inclusion of all perspectives on the TMA and order and agreement, or voting, if you like. It's a little bit of a tension between inclusion and order for you as a group. Probably want to think about how you manage that. And the other thing you want to think about is how you remain a forum for the kinds of regionally focused discussion, not necessarily decision-making, but discussion that you have had in the past. This has been an important forum for that kind of discussion. There is a potential that if you focus too much on your decision-making and votes and Robert's Rules of Order, you might lose the opportunity for that. And staff has some thoughts on ways to keep that opportunity open. So in any case, that's all I wanted to review. I think the order was Harry, Councilman Cohen, Commissioner Merman, and Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you very much. I have been on this group since the beginning, since 2013, and I actually think that the best thing that I have gotten out of this experience is a regional perspective that I hear, particularly from the Pinellas and Pasco people, that I can then integrate into my decision-making when I go back to Hillsborough County to cast votes both on the MPO and on the city council. The most difficult and controversial vote I ever took on the MPO in the last 7 years was related to the TVX project. There was intense local opposition within Tampa and an awful lot of regional support for it. And because of what I learned here, I was able to vote for it because I decided that I thought that the regional concerns not just outweighed the local considerations, but I felt we could address the local considerations, whereas if we scrapped the entire project, we were going to lose as a region completely. And I want to echo something Commissioner Kemp said earlier. It has been the cooperation of FDOT that has ultimately, in my view, vindicated the approach that I took to that, because FDOT really did come to the table with some changes to what was originally proposed by scrapping TBX, going to Tampa Bay next, and making the assurances that they have related to the lanes. The reason I bring that up is because I think that the key to that success, because I consider that a success, has been the fact that there isn't a regimented voting structure, and that we never did have to get into the issues of weighted voting and population and things like that. And let's face it, those are the things that stumped our constitutional convention at the beginning of the Republic, and they had to divide into two separate houses. I do not believe that if we go toward a strict voting system, that that anybody in Hillsborough County is going to be accepting of it if it doesn't take into account the population, the relative populations of the counties. I will also tell you that although I'm very glad to be here as a representative of the Tampa City Council, the mayor of Tampa, who is the strongest mayor in the region, does not have representation on this board. And there are, the idea that that person, whoever it is going to necessarily buy into regional priorities that are set up without that person's ability to influence it, I think is just not gonna work. I also want to say that this referendum that we are facing in November in Hillsborough County, the 1 cent transportation referendum, I think that if there is, and this goes back to the issue of combining the MPOs, because to me this is all related. Whether the MPOs are combined, whether the TMA group is formulated separately, I think if there is any suggestion that a plan that is being voted on in a referendum where much of the money is going to be directed to implementing the Hillsborough MPO's long-range transportation plan, if there is any suggestion that there will be other counties weighing in or vetoing how that money is going to be spent, I think it will be an absolute, total non-starter for that referendum getting passed. And I will tell you, from the point of view of the city of Tampa, we desperately need that money. We have a tremendous backlog of projects that need to be done. So it makes me very worried to sort of embark on this before we for us, know where that is going. The only other thing I want to say is that because we've never gotten bogged down in who's going to be chair and how many votes there are going to be per county, it allows our MPO to send the three of us here, even though none of the three of us agree about a lot, and we don't necessarily represent the consensus view of our MPO. We're actually here because we're the three that have expressed interest in being here. And I'm afraid that if we move on to a situation where there are formalized votes and we get bogged down in a discussion about whose vote is going to carry what weight, that's not who's going to get sent here anymore. Who's going to get sent here then is going to be a reflection, and then finally, when you end up with people like that making the decisions, to me, I just see the whole thing breaking down. I guess where I'm going is, I actually think it's worked well. For the limited purpose that we have, I think it's worked well. And I don't know that changing it, I don't know what people expect this board to be able to do if it has no authority and no money. And so without either of those two things, we can vote. But I don't know what we can hold people to and what it really ultimately means.
Just a quick clarification and then Rick has a response. So does that mean, I think that's very clear as regards weighted voting and representation. Does that mean you're also uncomfortable with the staff recommendation that 2 of you be required to support something before it's a TMA recommendation?
You know, I'm interested to hear what everyone else, I'm open-minded to hear anything, but I just know that when we go back to Hillsborough County, if we try to bind anybody to something that we came to consensus on here, I think we're going to be immediately told that we have no authority to do that.
Okay.
So I think those are great points, and if I can just clarify what our intent is. This is Raphael's last meeting before we have to decide to renew his contract. And the staff director's recommendation is, it's no reflection on Raphael, but it's not to renew that contract, and to have staff sort of manage these meetings, and to have a chair just facilitate the meeting. And I think our first choice is always, let's reach consensus and not take a vote. Let's do that. But there may be times when we set annual priorities, and we had a devil of a time the last 2 times to even address the priorities that we already established. That it may be a time to come to shove, and what is the will of this organization recommending back to the MPOs what those priorities are. And without a facilitator, I think you're going to need a chair to move the meeting along. And so that's part of this recommendation.
Okay, that's a much more minor question, though, I think, with all due respect.
And it would be a rotating chair by meeting. So every meeting, it just rotates from meeting to meeting, not a permanent chair, not a chair for a year or anything like that. Just to clarify. And when we talked earlier about the regional long-range plan, please understand, we have no intention, it's never been discussed at a staff level, to have any sort of veto power on projects that are in Hillsborough County or that are funded by Hillsborough County revenues. And I want to be real clear as a Pinellas representative saying that.
Commissioner Moore.
Thank you. Like Councilman Cohen, he and I started on this group together. And I have been very, very vocal about taking action. And I tend to look at things a little bit different, and I think I agree with everything Councilman Cohen said. In the big picture, we're probably one of the most sought out regions in the United States for economic development, hands down. Our county is probably the fastest growing county in the state. We're the #1 place to come look for a job, everything. Okay, so I think the frustration for me has been that we are still sitting here 5 years later, and we really are still tinkering with trying to get something done. And the one voice thing is still not happening. And there's, we individually, our counties have major road projects that need to get done. We all know that. There's still too many groups. I mean, there's confusion. TBARDA, TMA, CCC. Most people don't even know what an MPO is or does. And so I think the issue for me is something needs to get done. And when you go to a legislator like Daryl Rasan, what are we going to say? Like today, he left here. We didn't tell him what we wanted next year. This was a great opportunity to do that, just so you all know. I mean, Janet Long, she's served in the legislature. You know, you got to start early and repeat it often. So I think for me is, are we, and the way I look at it is MPO, above every organization, TBARDA, everybody, we have staff, we have expertise, we can get this job done. So why can't this TMA group emerge and I'm just so frustrated, I can hardly come up with words. But how can we emerge to the point where we can get the financial assistance, we can get approvals for projects, that we can, be adopted either by DOT or the legislature as the go-to group for the region. Because if we don't emerge and do that, we're just going to be a group that comes in here and discusses regional priorities, will agree on things, and I think it's all really good. I would like to see us start to take it a step further and have our individual MPO directors start to work on the local connectivity projects that need to go into our priority projects. I do think that that's a critical thing that we haven't gotten done yet. But where do we go? How can we get a recommendation on the direction we need to take? I don't think it's terms or rotating or chairs or anything like that. I think it's a power issue and authority issue. And I'm just like, there has to be a clearer voice in the community of who the go-to group is for decision making in the region. Because what happened was, when things started to change, green light happened, it failed, we didn't get a referendum on. There were a lot of things that has happened that kind of changed us over the last 2 years. And, you know, I don't think, I mean, we all need to sit up here and say collectively, do we support the referendum for this or that or this? We have the ingredients to be the power and the voice, but we're not using it, and either we need to go somebody and ask for them to give it to us, but the legislature gave power and authority to TBARDA, and now I see us on parallel train tracks, and still, well, I mean, no, we are on parallel train tracks of trying to be the voice to get something done. And guess what? Nothing is getting done. So, how do we do that? Who's going to make, I mean, I would have liked Cutter to give us a rock solid recommendation. Whether we agree with it or not is a point that we would discuss. But somebody please recommend to us what we have to do to start getting stuff done.
Okay, the order is Commissioner Herman, Councilman Peter Altman, Commissioner Eggers, Commissioner Long, and Councilwoman Caudell. You are, what?
I had mine up before when they.
You're first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you say my name.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, if I didn't, I meant to.
I want to agree with Councilman Cohen's recommendations wholeheartedly. I just don't think that, first of all, this group has no jurisdiction, has no money. So, you know, why not just have discussions here? And if you're going to take votes on things, I do object to 2 on 3, unless, if we're going to take votes and we're going to start weighing in on those votes, then we need to be weighted. We need to be weighted by county populations. That's how the MPO is done. The MPO is also jurisdictionally a federal agent. It's under the federal government's rules. So, you know, I think we have too much, we have all these discussions going in all these different groups, none of them actually with jurisdiction or money. So it's a big, you know, I don't know, I don't think it's a use of valuable use of all the electeds' times. But I think that fundamentally, I believe it just goes back to local and goes back to Hillsborough County for me. And you can have, you know, we could recommend or, you know, the support, like for instance, very supportive of the BRT in downtown St. Petersburg as a group. But I don't think this group or TBAR or anybody should be directing the projects as they go through Hillsborough County. And Hillsborough County taxpayers are the ones that have the final word. That if there is money raised, that have the final decision making to be done. So if this group wants to have some kind of finality or power, which it doesn't have jurisdictionally anyway now, and I don't see how that could be done in any way, that, you know, definitely would have to be a weighted body as prescribed for MPOs by federal law. But it also, I just think it would totally defeat any purposes here. I think maybe it's time for this meeting, this body, to be meeting less frequently, to focus on the interconnected projects that we may have, or give support to to the local projects within communities. But I'd support, if we're going to go to any kind of votes about things that are somehow, even though they don't have any power to make a difference, then we have to go to a weighted kind of process.
Yeah, thank you. And as the sort of short-term replacement for Councilman Starkey, I just wanted to provide a few observations from being an outsider to the meeting and having been an MPO chairman and involved in the MPO back in the old days. I was born in St. Petersburg. I was brought to Pasco County to live where my residence is, and I commuted and worked in Hillsborough County and Tampa. So, when I came home from the hospital, Pasco County had 25,000 people in it. There's 500,000 now. Through my terms in the city council and as mayor, I was one of the 6 people who signed the original Tampa Bay Water Agreement. So there was a very contentious regional authority that was operating at the time without my city, which was one of the 6 who contributed assets and resources to that, to a regional effort. And ultimately, we got a vote on that, and it is a weighted vote. But I was curious to the comment that I heard about the Senate, the House, and what's fair, and what's population, and what's by state. So just as a potential to throw out in this quest for some kind of options for you to debate, perhaps there could be a double. One of the reports said there had to be unanimous in one of these MPO groups. Perhaps there could be some kind of double standard where you could use both a weighted and a per MPO or per county calculation, so that if anything passed this board, it would have to pass both as a weighted vote and as a majority of the 3 MPOs, each standing with equal standing. The other observation I'd like to make is that I heard an awful lot of conversation, which unfortunately the person who spoke the most is not here to hear what I have to say, but nevertheless, a lot of conversation about commuting, and that the commuting was internal to the county, and who had the most commuting and who needed the money. So I already heard some of these sort of silo type arguments, which doesn't appear to be part of purpose as I'm looking at it, which is purely for regional. Finally, with respect to the DOT, back in my days, I remember clearly hearing that federal dollars were for interstate commerce, and that those dollars had to be spent on the interstate system or on a federal highway like Highway 19, which has been, the lifeblood of Newport Richey as sort of the extension of the Pinellas area. So there are all these mixed issues. Pinellas putting economics together with transportation is just genius, and I think it's important and critical, and I think decisions could be made, for example, with transportation with respect to economic development. If you live in Hillsborough County and work in Pasco, you can get to work twice as fast because the commute is all headed that way. Now, that doesn't mean that anything's going to change, but regional cooperation could help to, as the senator said, replace this competitive, historic sort of conundrum with a more cooperative basis. So the outcome for me is to say, if you want to have some kind of decision which you can say has the consensus, you might want to consider that bifurcated process that would allow Pasco County, for example, to have equal standing in one vote, and you can have a weighted standing in another vote. I don't know what that does. I haven't thought that through. It just came to my mind, so that's all I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 comments waiting. We're past time. I'd like to take those 3 comments, just so you know, you have one more meeting in the contract if you choose to use it. You don't have to. So if you don't get to agreement today, I don't know that I'd be helpful, but everybody's deferring to you, Commissioner Hall.
And thank you very much, because I have some fabulously good news to share, and I wish Commissioner Kemp was still here to hear it. And to your comments, Commissioner Merman, I think this is going to make you very happy as well. So through an interlocal agreement that T-BARTA formed with PSTA, we have taken T-BARTA from not so great of a place to a very healthy, productive place where all of the bills are paid. And at the end of the month, we will have, are you ready? Millions of dollars in the bank for T-BARTA. So it just says to me that we are getting great things done. We are moving the project forward for the BRT with dedicated lanes. And given what Commissioner Merman said and Councilor Cohen, it occurs to me that the newly created statutory version of T-BARTA has put in place a formula and a structure to really get things done for the first time ever in cooperation with FDOT. You've already heard the good secretary talk about the positive big project things that are actually going to go on no time soon, correct? That maybe, just maybe, the original mission of this group is now being somewhat duplicated by T-BARTA, who actually has money for the first time ever and has authority to recommend to FDOT and to the feds to be able to get stuff done. I am so thrilled with what has gone on, and thank you, Brad Miller, for your good hard work, and Secretary Gwen for all of the efforts to really move the region forward. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I've got all kinds of notes here, and I really don't know which direction to go in. Listening to some of my colleagues in my county and colleagues in the other county, again, I did not start at the beginning. I was here halfway through or 2/3 of the way through the process. I thought there was some direction that, from outside entities that said we needed to consider forming one MPO. And
There was.
And then we decided to do this step here.
Yep.
To kind of have that kind of good conversation that talks about these interconnecting projects. And so, again, I think your comments hit several of the points that I wanted to make. And I think sometimes we get just, I think we have to rethink again. I think one of the comments was made earlier, you have to keep rethinking and restating the good projects, and I think we got to keep saying why we're here together and talking. We may not have voted on anything, we may not have power to vote on anything, but we've been trying to get Pinellas County and Hillsborough County commissioners in the same room talking about whatever issues. So this is a good way to at least have conversation with City of Tampa and Pinellas County on issues that are important to all of us. So. To the commissioner who left, who said that there was, wondered what value that we had here, I think there is that value. I also think there's a value to identifying projects that are really important, like the one that we talked about earlier, the one at State Road 60 and the interstate. I mean, okay, so can we make a non-weighted vote and a weighted vote, both coming out with the same result that says that's the most important project and we want to fund that project #1, period. I think that's a powerful statement to be making. Can we make that decision? No. We can certainly make a recommendation that this group thinks it's important, so each of our MPOs makes that vote for now. So I think there is, and I think the fact that we're talking together gives us something that our individual MPOs don't have. We don't have that. We're not talking to each other, so we are now through this group. So I think it's really important. So I want to stay in control of our own destiny by addressing some of this MPO merger conversation with this effort. Maybe it is T-BARTA. I'm not quite sure how that merged conversation needs to be going on. Maybe we need to talk about this group versus that group and whether this group needs to continue, whether the same mandate about forming a consolidated MPO is no longer there. And so we can each retreat back to our MPOs because if T-BARTA is now having that conversation, well, let's have that conversation. But again, I think there was some other comment about alignment of federal and state funds with local interests. I mean, they need to continue being kind of aligned, and I think that's an important part. If we're not having that kind of conversation, then how do we ever have that alignment? I like the chapter of the book's discussion, that regional long-range plan that we can all kind of sign off on chapter 1. Well, we're going to still work on chapter 2, 3, and 4. Each of our counties have lots of work to do. So again, I don't think these have to be mutually exclusive efforts. And so from my perspective, I think the regional conversations are critically important. I've heard from national economists through the local real estate, the women's local real estate group that says this is one of the #1 powerful regions in the country. And it isn't by being in silos. It's not Tampa talking by themselves, Hillsborough talking by themselves, Pinellas talking. It's talking together on some level. And right now, it's the only one that we have. And T-BARTA may be morphing into that kind of conversation, but this is really important stuff. And so I'm gonna keep supporting it. I don't have any insecurity issues from my perspective. We want to have 10 members and have 5 from Hillsborough and 3 from here and 2 from there, whatever the weighting is, that's fine. Whatever that kind of conversation is, Hillsborough County can't take the region by themselves. We have 2 other counties that will weigh in. To your point about bringing up Tampa Bay water, that's a great parallel that started from a really rough spot to a really smooth working machine that continues to have little challenges today. We still have those conversations with Tampa and Hillsborough and Pinellas and Pasco. But guess what? We are a group that's working, that's funded, that's making decisions. And so I want to continue to encourage that we have these regional opportunities to talk. If it's T-BARTA and that's the place to do it and no longer in this joint MPO, fine, we can talk about that. But I think the regional conversations, to me, our residents deserve that. And they do not deserve the siloed conversations that have been going on for way too long. And so I think that they deserve it, and you deserve my respect, and I deserve your respect. And so from that perspective alone, this kind of conversation is ultra critical, and the fact that she made her comments and left really bothers me, because I want her to hear from the rest of us that you can have your siloed conversations, but we're going to come here to elevate above that, because when I say above it, I don't mean in importance, but I'm talking about in the region. Because each of these sections are obviously critically important, but we got to rise above that and have this one voice kind of conversation. Thank you.
I am cognizant of the fact that we're past time. We've got 3 comments now.
So I've been here since 2013 when we were talking about CSX and whether or not we should call it the Clearwater Line, and it took us 2 meetings just to get off the subject. Just put that out there in the beginning. However, I'm going to try to tie this up into why we're talking about this item, and that is that, Raphael, we're going to miss you, but our directors have briefed all of us on the fact that we need a rotating chair and continue this. I know that Commissioner Long and I have worked on an org chart for a long time, and she successfully has taken this, along with the board members of T-BARTA, to a level of which that they are now, because of Senate Bill 1672, which I think everybody should read that. I also think everybody should go through the MPOSC if they have not, because it's important, and thank you, Cutter, for being here, and your presentation was awesome. However, I do agree with my colleagues, and I thank you from Pasco County for your inputs. It's perfect. We have an opportunity here with TMA to be TBARTA, TMA, the three MPOs, which would be feeding the regional MPO direction. That is very, very important. That vision, in other words, what we heard from Senator Rasan, that vision is very, very important. And for us to go away, of course, the citizens know the way it is if it's competitive or if it's action. And at this point in time, I don't believe all three of these counties, Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough, are growing in different ranges. I believe all three of those counties are growing fast and amazing. We talk about numbers. The numbers are everywhere, not just in Hillsborough. They are in Pinellas and they are in Pasco. And all of us struggle to get over here. We all need to work together on that. Whether you have, our items, the long-range transportation plan, the top 5 items, the very top 2 are our BRT and our CSX. Just because we are working on a Wesley Chapel to St. Pete, or I'm going to say it another way, St. Pete to Wesley Chapel, because I've had people correct me on the way that I say that. That's unbelievable to me. We have a project list that just because we're working on BRT doesn't mean we're not still working on CSX. We're very excited about those projects. And I think that we need to work together on the voice and make sure that the voters know, based on what Senator Rasan said, we need to help them in Tallahassee with our regional MPO plan is competitive or action. And I believe we really need to take action. And I think that our district secretary would agree with me that, look at our org chart, TBARTA, TMA, MPO, and local. I think that's what we need to focus on, is the org chart and the direction that we need to go in.
Councilwoman Rice, Commissioner Merman, and Secretary Gwynn will have the last word.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. It seems to me that when the TMA was formed in December of 2013, it did come out of a necessary and noble effort to connect our MPOs and to share discussions about regional priorities. And of course, you can't argue, we've heard it numerous times stated here, that that regional one voice or that one message is important, but certainly has greater value if that regional vision is actually backed by real planning, implementation, and funding. And in the time since the TMA has formed, TBARTA's role has changed, has really transformed in really some positive and powerful ways to step into filling in that gap. I still think there's a value here in the discussions we have. I don't think this necessarily needs to be a channel to, or a way to form a channel to forming a regionalized MPO, but we've got to have those conversations, and this is a place, certainly it makes sense to have those important conversations. We do have a recommendation that's on the floor, or I don't know if it's on the floor, because I don't know if there's a motion, or we make motions, but
It's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation. I would certainly think it makes sense for us to go forward, and the suggestion that we kind of swap who our chair and vice chair is, who run the meetings. Every meeting certainly sounds very equitable, very fair, and after our next meeting, if we want to continue a conversation about voting structure or rated voting, we can have that discussion then. I don't have a strong opinion about that right now, but I am fine with how this group would continue to meet, with basically having our staff facilitate our meetings.
If I can clarify, that staff recommendation is really an interim recommendation, because we've heard we're going to have a recommendation on strengthening regional coordination anyway. So we're really just, how do we keep moving forward over the next several meetings through 2019? And I'm prepared to say, let's hold off on a voting process. We can still operate by consensus, but we need somebody to run the meeting.
This is quick. I do think there's a lot of value in this group, otherwise I wouldn't keep asking to get appointed back to it every year.
I thought you wanted to sit next to me.
I I do like that. My city of Tampa friend over here, but I guess it's for Secretary Gwen. I mean, would there be value of this TMA group being like an advisory committee on Tibarda? There had been talk, I think, I don't know, can't remember which group was suggesting that, but I'm kind of thinking that that would be a really good home for us to really give some really good feedback locally, and because we take our local feedback and then we develop these regional plans. I know they're doing that also, but I just wonder if that would be of value.
Well, kind of what I've been thinking about as I'm listening to all of this, and we were asked a few times what DOT's preference is on certain things, and really we don't have a preference in terms of whether we have combined MPOs, MPO alliances, things like that. What I have a big struggle with, just to kind of give you a little bit back, a little bit of what I face sometimes. The regional projects, the big regional projects that we see built around the state are built with SIS money, strategic intermodal. That's the big money, and we don't control that at the district. We get certain money. Each district gets certain money based on formula, populations, all that. But this SIS money is there. It's competition for that money. Some of the legislators certainly have a lot of say in helping to guide some of that money. Local governments and MPOs and all also, and the districts do as well. But there's so much demand for that SIS money compared to the SIS needs that are out there, that it's almost like if you have a chink in your armor, you lose. And that's what's happened to us in the last few years. We've gotten a chink in our armor. And Orlando and Jacksonville, who wanted First Coast Outer Beltway, I-4 Ultimate, beyond the Ultimate I-4, they wanted those. They haven't had that chink. And so just a couple weeks ago, me and our staff, we went up there more or less making the case for the downtown, I don't want to call it downtown interchange, because that's not what it is, but the West Shore area work. And we're saying we really need that. It's important to the region. And some of the questions we get back is how important is it to the region? Are they going to support you when it gets in the paper that it's not necessarily, you're going to get the folks that come and they don't want you to build express lanes anywhere. I understand that. There's a certain group of people that they're entitled to that. But when the newspaper gets articles and they start getting heat, is the regional leadership going to stand behind that priority and say, that is our priority? We understand that it's not necessarily 100% of the population wants it, and there's going to be some criticism we get. And so what I'm trying to get is, we have the districts, we want these projects. We know how important they are. I think our legislative delegation, it would support us. I just don't know whether at times we have, that third component of it that's willing to rise above the chatter that comes up and tries to tear everything we try to do down by saying that there's bad parts to it. That's why, I was glad with Senator Razan here to be able to just say that, that is our #1 priority. That is huge for us. It's $1.4 billion that's going to go somewhere, and we want it to come here. But I really worry that it's going to go to Orlando, or it's going to go to Jacksonville, or it's going to go to South Florida, because, whether it's a metro plan that's one MPO that does speak as one voice by design because they have that structure, or whether it be Jacksonville, who has, for some reason, been able to draw a lot of the SIS money into their First Coast Outer Beltway. So that's what I'm saying. I don't really care who the voice is for the local area to bring all the different MPOs and the things together, but it'd be nice if that group was strong enough to weather the storms that we face in the paper and in all the different things that come up, and still say, you know what, we understand, but this is important to us and we need to get it done. So I don't really care as long as that message that the legislators get, and our central office, who makes the ultimate decision on the SIS money, sees that we don't have a chink in our arm. We're strong, and we're gonna go for it and compete for it as strong as everybody else, so whether that's, whatever structure is really.
So let me ask you, so TBARDA is kind of the voice now? I mean, that's the voice that the Bay Area delegation is paying attention to, more or less, on transit, the regional projects. So if we were to be like the subcommittee or advisory committee under them, that would probably increase their voice in promoting these projects. Would that be, do you see that value in that? Or
I really, I don't really I haven't thought through how that, what the best, you've got 3 MPOs that could all speak. I mean, there's nothing keeping you from making joint,
Right.
Whether, how that would work through the.
To guard it. So I guess I'm just going to ask our staff to engage in conversation with the chairman and the executive director at TBARDA and just see if there's value with that. Because if it's seamless and the voice becomes stronger, then it helps you more in trying to get those SIS dollars. And I do agree that's the biggest challenge is Orlando, Jacksonville, and Miami-Dade have always been stronger. In my 20 years of working with the legislature, always have more strength in the legislative process, always. And so anything we can do to strengthen our voice, I think will get us the results we want.
I try to remind them that we're a bigger region than Orlando.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't
Absolutely.
necessarily believe me, and I have to show them the numbers.
Well,
We are bigger than Orlando, we acted that way.
we are, and some of this gets into politics and all that kind of stuff, and Disney has, the magic ears, I guess.
We're structured.
And we are structured, and one thing about us is we have that huge body of water that we have to navigate around to try and create a good network, transportation network, so.
I'm sorry, just one final comment from my perspective, and it was in the meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, when we had the roundtable discussions, and there was a gentleman from one of the large financial companies who was sitting at our table, and he said, sorry, no, I apologize, and he said, we happen to build our facilities in Hillsborough County, kind of like the State Road 60, that project might be our most important project. But he said, we don't recognize boundaries. Our jobs that we are building here, and there's over 5,000 of them, 5,000 or 6,000 of them, are for our residents who really, so our responsibility is that, it is for our residents. It is to rise above all of that other stuff so that we can have successful projects for these companies to then have jobs that are our residents. So I think they built a place in Hillsborough County instead of Pinellas or instead of Pasco, that's fine. The jobs, it doesn't matter, it's for all of us here. And I think again, a powerful region is about jobs, it's about people working, it's about raising the rates and wages for everybody. It all kind of works, as you said earlier, it's kind of all connected in so many ways. And so, and I think the other thing is that maybe you could think about that transportation versus transit. They're kind of that transit component. We're kind of more of a transportation component. So there probably is a role for both of us to kind of work together. So anyway, thank you for indulging.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure where that leaves you. There was more comfort with the chair and co-chair proposal than with the weighted voting. And that's probably, the chair co-chair proposal is within your purview to decide.
Can I just clarify a little bit to your point? And I think it's a good suggestion to see how we can strengthen working with Florida. The Chair's Coordinating Committee, which is 7 counties, 7 MPOs, 6 MPOs, 7 counties, is already a subcommittee of TBARDA. What we created this group was to really hone in on the 3-county collaboration of MPOs, which are a federal creation. And we have our own responsibilities of a long-range plan, a multi-use trails plan, a multimodal planning framework, whereas TBARDA has been narrowed to focus on transit. And as much as we are recommending transit strategies, we can certainly be that advisor to TBARDA, and I think that's extremely well put. But I don't know that that makes as much sense for all the other modes, where the MPOs have an obligation to DOT to say what our priorities are, and on the CIS priority projects as well. That's really where the MPO have the authority, and I want to maintain that rather than subverting that under a state-created entity like T-Bar. But, I think the conversation needs to be had, and we can continue working. It's a great suggestion. I really want to just figure out, this is a very good organization for having the dialogue and developing the recommendations. I think we've moved beyond the need for a facilitator, and I think we, with all due respect to Raphael, I think we need to make that decision, and we don't have to decide all the details today. As I said, it's an interim strategy, but can we agree with this group that beginning in the November meeting or beginning in the January or February meeting, whenever that one is, can we have a rotating chair among the group here? And then let's continue the conversation of how we agree to move things forward. Because I do agree that consensus first is the best strategy and would prefer that.
I would like to make a motion for the recommendation that we do exactly what you just said with and rotate our chairs. We can figure that out among us. We're all grown-ups, and we just go forward immediately. There's big stuff going on. We need to get going.
All in favor?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Okay, done.
Thank you. We will table the other items and we will get back to you at the next meeting. Raphael, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Written on the back.
Really good comments.
Exactly, agree to disagree.
A lot of good points. Hey, welcome to the group. Great. What a meeting.
Yeah. I liked, I agree that it seemed like it was going and we should be making recommendations to Loretta. Rich had a good point as well, so there's going to be a lot.
Good things are happening. Good things
Yeah,
happening
it
to
is.
you. Good things are happening to the group. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Welcome. You betcha. Hey, way to go.
Thanks. This is hard work.
It is not easy. Thank you. Congratulations.
I appreciate it.
As usual. As usual. I listen to you. I'm like the philosopher king.
I wasn't, listen, the reason that there's no consensus is we can't speak with one voice is because there isn't consensus in the community about what people want. I mean, the elected officials were flat. Yeah, I.